Hey, I know it's been a while, but I have been basically writing papers nonstop since January. And what is a video essay if not an overglorified paper? So I haven't had too much time until now. This video is about liberation and problems in the form of women's sports and exercise, which is something I am very, very passionate about. I have been dealing with a heck of a lot of misogyny lately. All of this misogyny is kind of becoming like a bunch of little worms feeding on my brain, and I can't make them stop! I can't make them shut up! They're loud worms, they talk, they have a brain, unlike real worms. Do worms have brains?
Wish that were me.
I did not take my ADHD medication this morning. The other day, I put on a two-piece that showed more skin than I'm used to. For a moment, I thought, wow, I look really pretty right now. It's summer, and I'm finally becoming confident, both in myself and my femininity. Then, the usual complicated feelings started flooding in. The ever-present safety voice. You have to walk the dog, but there's no way you can go out in that. You'll get catcalled, and you hate being catcalled. You get catcalled in sweatpants. This'll be worse. You're not safe dressed like this. A sad truth flooded my body. You know, if something happens to you in this outfit, you'll get blamed. After the safety voice comes the religion voice. This outfit is indecent, and you deserve condemnation for wearing it. I suddenly remembered the time at church camp, when I was sitting on the cold floor of our dusty cabin, and my counselor told me, yes, of course sexual assault is bad, it's a terrible evil, but it's also my job to keep my brothers from stumbling. Part of me bristled hearing that, the part of me that's been a feminist since I was 5 years old, but part of me internalized it. Part of me believed, as I'm prone to believe any negative thing anyone says about me. I stood in the mirror later that day, Bible verses screaming at me. Never mind Matthew 5:29, when Jesus proclaims, if your right eye causes you to lust, gouge it out and throw it away. It's a messy book because it's about people, and people are messy and strange. But no, Matthew 5:29 isn't the voice I absorbed deep within my skin. I absorbed the messages that told me I have to keep my brothers from stumbling. It's my fault I should have hidden my body better. Showing skin is dishonoring to the Lord. Never mind that it's fine if the boys run around shirtless. Girls can control their own lust, you see, but boys will be boys. So I have to cover up. After the church voice comes the darkest voice. Body dysmorphia. Body dysmorphia doesn't care how strong I am. It doesn't care how much my running has improved recently or all the amazing things I can do with my physical shell. Instead, for a minute in the mirror, I just hate myself. These are the voices that control me when I look in the mirror in an outfit that I was once excited to wear. First confidence, then fear, then utter guilt and humiliation. This is the daily experience of possessing a female body, being told what to do and how to be by everyone else who think they know what's best. Nobody cares what you think or how you feel. How do you make sense of it all? Well, if you're me, you change into a t-shirt. Then, you make a video essay. All this to say, lately I have been thinking about my body, and what it means to inhabit it. I've been experiencing a lot of street harassment lately. Something that would once be a shocking event to me is now almost a daily occurrence. Becoming hyper-vigilant of the world's perception of me made me curious. What is the history of women's bodies and the way people have treated them? So, like the former AP seminar student I am, getting the College Board results back in 4 days. I got a 5. I started to research. I also happen to be a runner, so my research led me in the direction of what it means to move in a female body, what the experience of exercise is in a historical context, and it is fascinating. Because not that long ago, a female runner would have been a freak, maybe even a social pariah, and today there are millions. It was like 50 years ago that women first started running. I look at running as a way of taking my power back in a world where I often feel powerless. In a world that has told me every day since birth that I am weak and defenseless, becoming capable and strong in some way makes me feel safer. Knowing my own abilities gives me something to be proud of, and in the act of physical movement, I find liberation and joy. I want every woman to have that right. I do not want women to feel tethered to physical exercise as a way to make themselves thinner, more toned, or to conform to societal standards. I just want every woman to have that place where they can feel physically free. Not everyone perceives exercise that way, though. In fact, when I describe my love for running, I get a lot of disbelieving blinks. Like, you don't actually like cardio, you're just saying that. I'm not just saying that, I promise. You have no idea how much it means to me. How do many of us perceive exercise? A lot of people see it as some annoying or frustrating chore. And if that's you, I don't blame you. There is so much pressure to be active in our culture that it starts to feel like an obligation rather than a freedom. So, what if exercise was more than exercise? I thought you meant extra fries. What if the power to move your body was a radical act of liberation spearheaded by brave and nonconformist women in the not-so-distant past? What if exercise was not just a way to log more hours on the trail or at the gym, not just a way to burn calories, not just a boring chore, but rather a visceral way to take back power for people who have been denied power for a really long time? Yeah, I've been thinking, and I've been reading, because I've found that studying history helps me truly understand the present. It's like putting all of our modern-day struggles in context. By the way, if you have disabilities, mental health problems, anything like that gets in the way of exercising, please do not, or just in general, actually, please do not let this video make you feel left out, or discluded, or like I'm telling you have to exercise to live a fulfilling life, because that's not true. I'm simply looking at its history and the liberating potential it could have, not trying to tell people that they have to do it in order to feel liberated, or that they have to do it to be fulfilled, because I understand there are many, many, many barriers that often get in the way of it. So yeah, I would really, really hate for this video to make anyone feel discluded. Also, when it comes to, a lot of this also applies to AFAB people who do not identify as female. I just wanted to acknowledge that as well. And I also wanted to acknowledge that I don't think that there's an issue with trans women being in sports and stuff like that. So yeah. That was my quick, I really don't want to leave anyone out thing, because I would genuinely feel bad if I left people out. But I will be talking a lot about women in this video, and I understand that a lot of the time there are things that don't apply to all women or all AFAB people. So I'm just trying to generalize. Science and women have, shall we say, a checkered past. Science is not, and never has been, free of misogynistic biases. After Title IX, the effects of exercise on women were not studied as extensively as they should have been. Medical misogyny means that women are often excluded from medical trials. This makes women much more likely to suffer adverse effects from medication. This also means that there's a significant scientific research gap when it comes to women's bodies. It is harder for us to know how to take care of ourselves when most studies focus on men. When it comes to exercise, things get even more dicey. You see, the first sports bra was only invented 50 years ago.
It was in the mid-70s. It was the beginning of the fitness revolution. Everyone had started jogging, and a friend said to me, hey, at least just run 1 mile, mile and a quarter. I thought, I'll try this running thing, and I fell in love with it. I loved running. And we didn't know about endorphins or all that stuff back then. We had no idea. But I just loved it. And the only problem was my breasts. They were bouncing uncomfortably, and the bra that I was wearing, the straps fell down, and I was always hauling them up, and it was just not comfortable. And I thought, how can I fix this? Actually, it started as a joke. I mean, My sister started running later, like a year or so later, and she called me up and she said, "What do you do about these, the girls? What do you do about the girls? They're so uncomfortable. What do you do?" And I said, "I don't know." And she said, "Why isn't there a jockstrap for women?" We laughed. We thought that was so funny. And she said, "Yeah, same problem, just different part of the anatomy." And I went, "Yeah." And I took, it started out as a joke, but I took it seriously. I thought, yeah, there should be something. And so really, I invented the first sports bra because I was solving my own problem. It's touted as an iconic symbol of women's liberation. I had no idea that that's what was happening when I did this.
And it's only been 38 years since women were permitted to run the Olympic marathon. My mother was decently alive by that point. For most of history, women who wanted to pursue physical fitness have faced severe limitations. It's really only until very recently that women were even encouraged to take up athletic hobbies. In fact, most of the progress for women within this arena has occurred within one natural human lifetime. It's been less than 100 years since women began competing in Olympic track and field. It's been 86 years since women started competing in Olympic gymnastics. 50 years since Title IX required equal opportunities be provided for girls' sports in schools. Approximately 50 years since distance running first became normalized for women. 25 years since the first WNBA game. 3 years since Mary Kane spoke out against Nike's abusive Oregon project. Only 6 years since a serial sex predator was allowed intimate access to all of America's elite female gymnasts. And if you're a woman interested in playing something like football or rugby, there are really very limited opportunities for you. History is history, until it isn't, It all seems like the past, until you realize it's catching up with you. Because it hasn't been that long, and so, on top of the misogynistic research gap, female athletes also face another barrier: novelty. It's been a relatively short time since women were allowed to be athletic at higher levels. It's a bumpy road that we are still adjusting to. And oh boy, are we adjusting. The field of women's sports still struggles deeply. The tragedies left behind in the wake is frankly unacceptable. The relationship between women and exercise is historically complicated. With so many external pressures attempting to regulate our bodies, it's really no wonder either. It's sort of depressing, but also super fascinating, because for every limitation placed on women, there has been a brave woman willing to break it. So, folks, let's dive into the history. Buckle up, ladies and gentlemen, and get ready for things I typed during my recent hyperfixation on the history of stupid stuff people used to believe about the uterus. Don't worry, it's Lemon Lime G0. Hey, my dog's here! Okay. So we all know about the Victorian era, a bastion of women's rights. In 1874, Dr. Edward Clarke published Sex in Education, or A Fair Chance for the Girls, by Edward H. Clarke, M.D., member of the Massachusetts Medical Society. Why am I doing a British accent? He's from Massachusetts. And in 2022, I found a copy in some online archives and read the dang thing. Clarke stated on page 102 that, for women, both muscular and brain labor must be reduced at the onset of menstruation. Menstruation? How do you say that? I'm just gonna say menstruation. Menstruation? I'm gonna say menstruation. I'm gonna Google this!
Menstruation. Menstruation.
Did not know that was how you said that.
Edward Clarke's book was essentially the beginning of the female frailty myth, which was the idea that having a period and being a woman in general made you very weak and prevented you from being physically or mentally capable of the same things that men are.
Many early opportunities for women to engage in physical activity were thwarted as a result of this dogma. Dr. Clarke believed that menstruation rendered women perpetually sick, and therefore they must be on bed rest at all times, lest they grow even weaker. Yeah, not just when they were on their period. Clark thought that the ability to menstruate made women sick all of the time. And Clark wasn't just recommending that women limit physical activity. He also thought that activities such as reading would make women ill, as it was stealing the body's limited energy away from being used in menstruation. This myth of limited energy would become quite prominent. It was a pretty powerful tool for keeping women out of sports, but also out of higher education. In short, it limited women's activities to 1. Menstruating, 2. Having children, and 3. Doing chores. 4. Going to church. A very effective medical diagnosis. And the prescription was keeping women perpetually in the home. Right where men wanted them. Catch my drift? Some other horrific myths have been spread about the danger of women's exercise. Surprise, surprise, they're all centered around the uterus. Did you know that when basketball was invented in the 1890s, special rules were invented to prevent women from dislodging their uterus? I didn't until yesterday. Doctors used to warn that exercise could make a woman's uterus fall out and just, bounce around, detached from their body. The physician Aretius of Cappadocia called the womb an animal within an animal, an organ that moved of itself hither and thither in the flanks. To that I propose, have you ever seen a woman? A catch-all diagnosis for women was created called hysteria. Hysteria was known as the Great Female Neurosis. It basically meant that your womb was wandering around inside your body, causing problems on purpose. In fact, the uterus was thought to have a mind of its own, which controlled the primary functions of the body. In other words, it's not mental illness, it's just a bouncing uterus. The bouncing uterus was actually a very prevalent medical belief, first recorded in ancient Egypt. The first document to describe spontaneous uterus movement as a cause of mental illness was the Kahun Papyrus in 1900 BC. The treatment for the bouncing uterus involved acrid substances and perfumes, which I will only naturally assume means essential oils. When it came to the Greeks, the whole uterus thing only got worse. I'm going to directly quote from this paper. Great work, ladies. Fantabulous job on this paper. I loved it very much, because I found this whole segment deeply entertaining. According to Greek mythology, the experience of hysteria was the base of the birth of psychiatry. The Argonaut Melampus, a physician, is considered its founder. He placated the revolt of Argo's virgins, who refused to honor the phallus and fled to the mountains, their behavior being taken for madness. Whomst amongst us hasn't at one point refused to honor the phallus? That was the worst joke I've ever made. Melampus cured these women with hellebore and then urged them to join carnally with young and strong men. Therefore they were healed and recovered their wits. I'm sure they did. Melampus spoke of the women's madness as being derived from their uterus being poisoned by venomous humors, due to a lack of, and uterine melancholy. Melampus did not stop to consider the fact that these virgins may simply have just been gay. They should have just kissed each other. It would have been a happier ending. Thus arose the idea of a female madness related to the lack of a normal sexual life. Plato, in Timaeus, argues that the uterus is sad and unfortunate when it does not join with the male, and does not give rise to a new birth. And Aristotle and Hippocrates were of the same opinion. This is the original r/men writing women, isn't it? Dear goodness gracious, I can't believe we built our modern society off of the ideas of these guys. Wait, actually I can. The treatments proposed by Plato are have more sex and fragrant fumigation. I guess maybe the essential oil girlies are onto something. There was one guy, though, Serenus, who thought the only cure for hysteria was for all women to be virgins forever. R.I.P. to the human race, I guess. Small price to pay for a uterus that doesn't bounce.
Okay, so here's the deal. I found this clip with the rest of my clips when I'm editing, and I don't know what it's for, and I don't know why I did it, but I know there was a reason. But I can't remember why. I just don't know.
In the Middle Ages, more misguided beliefs about women's biology were spread by St. Thomas Aquinas. St. Thomas believed that a woman was a failed man, inherently inferior because of Eve, or what freaking ever. Therefore, when a woman manifested symptoms of mental illness, it could only be due to possession by the devil. Pope Innocent something Roman numerals confirmed this theology, condemning women who exhibited depressive symptoms as heretics. I can't speak. Thousands of innocent women were put to death during the Inquisition on the basis of hysteria or neurosis. Fun fact, I was in the same room as St. Thomas Aquinas' finger one time. I should have stolen it. Unfortunately, it would still take several more centuries before the hysteria myth faded. In 1898, Dr. Carl Gerson wrote, "Violent movements of the body can cause a shift in the position and a loosening of the uterus, as well as prolapse and bleeding, defeating a woman's true purpose in life, i.e., the bringing forth of strong children." Okay, let's keep in mind that at this time doctors had so few real cadavers to study anatomy with that they had to resort to grave robbing. Just keep that thought in the back of your head. Eventually, the idea of a general neurological hysteria faded, and doctors began to separate the idea of hysteria into more distinct disorders, such as depression or anxiety. However, even in the absence of a diagnosis of hysteria, lingering myths about women hindered them from reaching athletic equality. Sometimes, when a woman would exercise anyway, despite prevailing social pressures not to, and gain some muscle, she would begin to be perceived as only partially female. Because women are on average smaller, it was believed that they were less capable. This is known as the frailty myth. The frailty myth goes as follows. Female frailty is a self-fulfilling prophecy. The belief in female frailty led to rules and regulations on women's bodies that prevented them from doing anything strenuous, thus keeping them frail. As well, beliefs that women were less capable of mental exertion led to regulations preventing them from getting an education, which kept them uneducated, and therefore perceived to be less intelligent. Do you see how this cycle leads to long-standing myths, like how men are more capable of logical and rational thought? Maybe it's because men have been the only people we allowed to express logical and rational thought for most of human history. Or, do you see how keeping women uneducated keeps men in power, which keeps women uneducated? But don't run. Your uterus will fall out. By the late 1900s, some of these Victorian beliefs were beginning to wane. A breakthrough! Finally! Some doctors began to advise that women should exercise. How? Running? Tennis? No. Chores. You heard me right. Women were finally encouraged to exercise. But they were encouraged to exert themselves by doing household chores. This was a small step in the right direction, I guess. Something I never realized until researching for this video was that a major barrier in opening up higher education to women was the belief that college could harm a woman's reproductive system. People thought if you thought too hard, you couldn't make babies. That didn't stop a lot of women from going to college, though.
The 1920s saw one of the most marked increases in women's higher education. At the beginning of the century, only 19% of college degrees were awarded to women, but by the 20s, that number had risen to 39%. This coincided with such breakthroughs in women's rights like suffrage and being able to cut their hair short.
By the 1920s, educated women were beginning to have their doubts. They had made it through college with reproductive function intact. Why couldn't others do the same? For women, history had always been marred with physical limitations. Of course, women were wanting the same freedom that men had. The basic pleasure of being allowed to move your body. The primal freedom of physical exertion. The 1920s saw a cultural shift. in which women were encouraged to be active. However, it was for all the wrong reasons. In the 1920s, exercise was not promoted as a means of women's physical liberation. It was encouraged because the body standards had dramatically shifted. In the Victorian era, beauty standards involved curviness and softness, something you could shape under layers of clothing and corsets. By the 1920s, women were wearing much lighter clothing, which revealed the true shape of their bodies. The body standard had become boyishness, meaning flat stomachs and flat chests. According to some guy, Dudley Allen Sargent, the ideal female body was between 5'3" and 5'7" and weighed between 125 and 140 pounds. Those really just sound like completely random numbers to me. Unfortunately, according to Dudley, I cannot achieve peak femininity because I am too short. I'm used to hearing that, though. It's fine. But why did some guy get to decide what the ideal female body was? I have no idea. At the time, those new standards were seen as freeing women from the pressure to be feminine, but it was really the beginning of a devastating pressure to be thin. Before the 20s, most clothes were handmade to fit the wearer's body. With the rise of mass-produced fashion, instead the body had to fit the clothes, pressuring women to slim themselves down in order to fit what was in style. Many women tended to see physical activity not as a way of being liberated, but as a way to achieve thinness. As we all know, the link between exercise and thinness was very hard to shake, and would become an issue for many people, including me and a lot of people that I have met in my life. I would say that the thinness and exercise correlation is the biggest barrier standing in the way of women's full physical equality. Opportunities for women to exercise began to open up very slowly for the rest of the 20th century. There's a lot more cool history I could share with that, but I kind of wanted to finish this video script as it was getting too long. But with that, we're right back where we started, with the passage of Title IX, which both paved the way for more female athletes, and with greater numbers of female athletes came more and more stories of issues, eating disorders, misogyny, and abuse. Maybe we no longer believe that the uterus is going to jump out, but women's bodies are still not fully valued on the same level that men's are. Nor are they understood, scientifically or spiritually, on the same way that men's are. So now that we know where we came from, where are we going? Historically, women were prevented from exercising at all. Today, women are free to pursue athletic endeavors, but female athletes are consistently abused and undervalued, leading to the current crisis we face. I've just spent a long time explaining why the Victorians were really dumb and wrong, but exercise does pose unique dangers to women. No, I'm not going to pull a Victorians were right on you. The dangers of exercise are when it's coupled with under-eating. And I believe that diet culture, as well as the idea that exercise exists to change your body, tone you, make you thinner, is a huge barrier when it comes to liberation. It would be remiss to make this video without discussing the issues surrounding women, eating, and exercise, especially because they are so prevalent in so many of our daily lives. Because exercise is not always liberating. Sometimes it is harmful. And the epidemic of eating disorders among female athletes is extremely disturbing to me. I believe it's an issue affecting a whole lot of women that is essentially being swept under the rug. And I refuse to take the optimistic route, say exercise is awesome all the time, and ignore the fact that compulsive exercise goes hand in hand with one of the most deadly psychiatric disorders. The passage of Title IX prohibited sex discrimination in education, and required that women's sports receive equal funding and attention as men's sports. This led to a dramatic increase in female athletes, which is an objectively amazing thing, a huge step forward. Y'all remember, though, when I told you about medical misogyny, there happens to be an extreme lack of scientific research on the effects of exercise on the menstrual cycle, because the world is run by men and they don't think it's relevant. C'est la vie, oui oui. With the passage of Title IX came a failure to properly research the unique struggles and dangers that female athletes might experience. This put a lot of new, excited young female athletes at risk for the female athlete triad. The female athlete triad may affect up to half of all female athletes, including those that exercise in an unofficial capacity. Female athlete triad is made up of 3 things. You probably already guessed that. 1. Disordered eating, which simply means engaging in harmful eating behaviors like restriction or obsessive calorie counting. Someone who struggles with disordered eating may or may not meet the strict criteria to qualify for a psychiatric eating disorder diagnosis, but it affects their life and their health all the same. The second part of the triad is hypothalamic amenorrhea.
How come I can say that correctly?
Which means a woman has stopped getting her period for at least 3 months. This type of amenorrhea is caused by undereating and overexercising. So it isn't just the exercise that's the issue. It's when exercise is paired with the lack of proper calorie consumption. When someone isn't getting enough food, the body must focus on survival. While this might seem at first to validate the Victorians' antiquated concerns about menstruation, let me explain why it doesn't. Strenuous exercise does not cause your uterus to bounce out of your body. Having a period does not make you too ill and too weak to exert yourself. Such a condition seems to play into the initial fears and opponents of female runners. The health condition is not caused by an extremity of exercise, but of negligence of fueling the body. A severe energy deficit, a lack of food, is what does harm to a woman's reproductive system, not running or playing basketball or reading books. Most people are not totally honest about how awful disordered eating, amenorrhea, and eating disorders are. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. If you think losing weight is fun and games, it's not. If you're someone who thinks that you may be starting to go down this path, please get help as soon as possible. I mean that in full seriousness. The health consequences of undereating as a teenager or at any time are horrifying. If you're able to prevent disordered eating from becoming a full-blown eating disorder, do it. Do it right now. Right now. Immediately. Look me in the eyes and tell me you're going to find someone who can help you. I know you probably won't listen. People with eating disorders have a lot of trouble acknowledging needing help, but I can at least try.
I'm going to link some helpful resources for people that are struggling in the description if you're interested.
Long-term consequences of undereating and hypothalamic amenorrhea can include higher risks of future heart attacks. It can cause depression, anxiety, loss of fertility, loss of romantic or sex drive, low estrogen, skin problems, hair loss, hair growth in places you don't want it, and by that I mean your stomach, hair growth on your stomach, fatigue, brain fog, insomnia, and so on. The most serious issue arising from amenorrhea, however, is the loss of bone density. Near irreversible loss of bone density can occur in just 6 months. Teenagedom is the time when people accumulate most of their lifelong bone mass. If you are undereating as a teenager, and a lot of teenagers do undereat, that will have harmful impact on your bone mass for the rest of your life. Which, yeah, that's serious. You might be more likely to fracture your wrists, hips, and ankles. You'll probably be more likely to injure yourself during exercise. Having a lower bone density also does shorten your lifespan, sometimes significantly. Building bone density as a teen is very important to prevent osteoporosis as an older adult. The third segment of the female athlete triad is osteoporosis. Osteoporosis makes bones so fragile that even mild stressors like bending over or coughing can cause a bone fracture. Bones weaken and break very easily. Compressed discs with osteoporosis can also affect lung capacity. It has been proven that weight-bearing exercise, like running and weightlifting, strengthens bones and increases bone density, unless you have amenorrhea. If you don't have your period and you're a woman, or AFAB, weight-bearing exercise actually decreases bone density, undoing any benefits that the exercise may have had. That is why getting your period as a female athlete is so critical to long-term health. Over 1/3 of female athletes report symptoms that put them at risk for eating disorders. This is really, and that's just those who report. Like I said earlier, a lot of people are not reporting this stuff. This is really, really disturbing to me. So, I had clinical symptoms of anorexia nervosa for 3 months, just 3 months, my freshman year of high school, and it took me more than a year to recover from it. It was absolute hell, and to make matters worse, I'm well aware that most people with eating disorders suffer for a lot longer than a year. To be honest, it's something that never fully leaves you. It will always be an experience that I have to carry with me. Quite frankly, I think of an eating disorder as an absolutely evil illness that I would never inflict on my worst enemy. I would not want the person I hate the most in the entire world to suffer that much. That's how bad these things are, and that's how seriously they need to be taken. 18 to 20% of anorexics die within 20 years, making the disorder more deadly than clinical depression. Yet I can say from my experiences at public high school that eating disorders are brushed under the rug, not nearly as discussed as the signs of depression or suicide. In fact, we are not warned or discuss them at all. We have a yearly seminar about the dangers of depression, but nothing about eating disorders. And it's not like they're uncommon. Anorexia affects 1 in 200 American women, and bulimia affects 3 or 4 out of every 100 women. Some of them may be set on a path towards death, so no, I'm not going to ignore this. Of course, the social pressure to remain thin affects this, but also underlying biological and genetic risks. This can mean that intense exercise can sometimes trigger eating disorders. For those that have the underlying genes that contribute to eating disorders, a calorie deficit, such as one generated by exercise, can negatively change the brain chemistry and trigger obsessive eating and exercise behaviors. Of course, eating disorders are certainly not a uniquely female problem, and men with eating disorders are often overlooked and ignored. Also, the eating disorder perception as a girl illness has led them to being taken much less seriously than they should be. Eating disorders are often characterized in media as the bane of frivolous, wealthy young white girls who want to be models or have mommy issues. You can blame that myth on Hilda Bruch and her book, The Golden Cage. There was a lot of anger in my eyes in that moment. I am so sorry. But The Golden Cage advocated parentectomies for girls with anorexia. Hilda Bruch recommended separating the sufferer from her parents completely because she believed anorexia was simply a symptom of an overbearing, control-freak mother. Now, I don't know if you've ever met my mother, but I can say for darn sure that that is not an issue I was dealing with. I hate this type of psychology with a burning passion. Well, would you tell me about your father? Well, what do you see with these shapes? What if it's a chemical imbalance in my freaking brain, Freud? Eating disorders are not a skinny white girl problem. In fact, the most deadly eating disorder is adenos, eating disorder not otherwise specified, which often is atypical anorexia. Atypical anorexia is anorexia that a person suffers when they are above underweight. So they're not underweight, they look normal, but that is the most deadly eating disorder. Sorry, I kind of went off for a second. So yeah, most sufferers are not skinny, not underweight. They are serious and deadly psychological and biological disorders, and I can't believe I still have to say that in the year of our Lord 2022. Screw you, Hilda. Whew, that's some pent-up rage over the past 4 years that I had to release for a second. Modern research has found that anorexia is linked to the brain imbalances that cause anxiety and obsessive-compulsive disorder, meaning that, more than anything, it is a chemical issue that can be triggered by social factors, much like how those at risk for depression can be triggered by something like grief or stress. According to the NIH, although traditionally viewed as a Western disease driven by social and cultural pressures to conform to an ideal and unrealistic body type, eating disorders are in fact complex, multifactorial, and found across all societies and cultures. Their incidence in non-Western cultures is not trivial, and includes significant prevalence rates and morbidity in sporting populations. Female athletes are at a significantly elevated risk for eating disorders, as well as morbidity from eating disorders. When I hear about a girl from my school who is suffering, it often seems to be brushed under the rug, or treated like a phase. You'd only think that if you'd never been in her shoes. Well, I have. But we can't brush this under the rug. 1 in 200 women in America suffering from anorexia. Only 50% will achieve full recovery. 18 to 20% of anorexics die within 20 years of contracting the disease. 20% of all untreated eating disorders are fatal, while only 3 to 4% of people who get eating disorder treatment die from it. So, recognizing the issue and getting help is one of the key ways to prevent passing away. 20%, though, is an extremely high morbidity rate for a psychiatric illness. Those that survive have to go through a grueling process of recovery, which is worth it, by the way, but I'm not going to pretend that it's easy. It's not something to joke about, nor is it an issue I can simply ignore. So, on one hand, we've got the deep-seated historical myth that women are not capable of intense exercise because they're the weaker sex. On the other hand, we've got a lot of women suffering from the health effects of female athlete triad, which at first glimpse, oh my gosh, it's really late. At first glimpse might seem to validate the sexist myths about women's exercise. However, that is only the case if you do not take into account that nearly all harms caused by women's exercise only happen if the woman is undereating. Exercise is not the issue, and neither is gender. Women are perfectly capable of engaging in high-level athletic activities in a healthy way. The issue is undernutrition. The issue is a lack of calorie consumption, not a lack of physical strength or mental fortitude. I myself have managed to find rest and liberation in the concept of exercise. I found a way to run regularly without feeling pressured to lose weight because of it, and it makes it so much better. The joy of exercise has been hidden and obscured by pressures to change your body. Exercise has so much potential to make people feel good, live longer, but none of it's compulsive. Pretty sure I already said that. I think I scripted this twice. We have made so much progress when it comes to women's physical liberation, but there's still so much work to be done, because there are still so many people being hurt. There are still so many stories of women athletes destroyed by their sports, and these are tragedies where roots run deep. What do we do? These issues cannot be resolved until we view women's bodies and health as equally important to men's. This means listening to sexual abuse survivors. This means never pressuring young women to lose weight or equating their performance with body weight. This means paying female athletes equally. This means providing maternity leave. This means dismantling diet culture. This means removing the stigma around periods and other issues specifically affecting AFAB people. This means ending the medical research gap. This means that doctors take women's pain just as seriously as they take men's, and so on and so on. I believe in the future we can bring these issues to light, instead of sweeping them under the rug, instead of keeping them quiet. I believe in the future where every body can become limitless. I care so much because, to me, running is freedom. According to Danielle Friedman, the rise of running represented a dramatic shift in the way women viewed their bodies and their own potential. Running is rarely graceful. It almost always involves breaking a sweat. It usually entails a public display of speed, strength, and self-reliance, or struggle and suffering, and it is in no way conventionally feminine. I have grown to see running as an act of infinite strength and rebellion, a place where I can find peace and power, in a world that often denies me both. Why do athletes like Mary Cain and Simone Biles and Allison Felix and Gracie Gold and Caitlin Ohashi come back to their sports? Over and over again, even after the hell they went through because of it. It's the same reason I come back to running, every single day. Because no matter what we have gone through, our respective sports make us feel free, in a world determined to keep us down. Because we have a passion for it that cannot be extinguished, even by the worst, most vile and abusive people humanity has to offer. Because we are resilient. Mary Cain and Simone Biles and Allison Felix and Gracie Gold and Caitlin Ohashi and every single survivor that walks this earth are resilient, beyond my wildest imagination. They are rebels against a broken system. They care for their sisters who are still trapped in that system. And you? Any viewer of mine who's made it this far, I want to tell you that you, too, are resilient and passionate and powerful, and I care about you. You have power, and you have worth. Within your heart, you have infinite strength and beauty beyond what you could ever imagine yourself capable of. It sounds corny, but I mean it wholeheartedly. There's too much humorous nihilism in this world already. Where are the people that care about things? Where are the people willing to look someone in the eye, toss away the irony for a minute, and just tell you, you're strong and incredible even through the suffering. Suffering doesn't make you weak. You have no idea the power you have inside. I want to be the person that tells that to you, even if you don't believe it. I know I don't just believe that stuff at face value, but I want to say it anyway. I'm going to close this video with a somewhat long excerpt from the writer and runner Haruki Murakami, because it is the only thing I've found that really embodies the peace and freedom that running brings to me. And it's just beautiful. I am often asked what I think about as I run. Usually the people who ask this have never run long distances themselves. I always ponder the question, what exactly do I think about when I'm running? I don't have a clue. On cold days, I guess I think a little about how cold it is, and about the heat on hot days. When I'm sad, I think a little about sadness. When I'm happy, I think a little about happiness. As I mentioned before, random memories come to me too. And occasionally, hardly ever really, I get an idea to use in a novel. But really, as I run, I don't think much of anything worth mentioning. I just run. I run in a void. Or maybe I should put it the other way. I run in order to acquire a void. But as you might expect, an occasional thought will slip into this void. People's minds can't be a complete blank. Human beings' emotions are not strong or consistent enough to sustain a vacuum. What I mean is, the kinds of thoughts and ideas that invade my emotions as I run remain subordinate to that void. Lacking content, they are just random thoughts that gather around that central void. The thoughts that occur to me while I'm running are like clouds in the sky, clouds of all different sizes. They come and they go, while the sky remains the same sky as always. The clouds are mere guests in the sky that pass away and vanish, leaving behind the sky. The sky both exists and doesn't exist. It has substance and at the same time doesn't. And we merely accept that vast expanse and drink it in. As I run, I tell myself to think of a river and clouds, but essentially, I'm not thinking of a thing. All I do is keep on running, in my own cozy, homemade void, my own nostalgic silence. And this is a pretty wonderful thing, no matter what anybody else says. From What I Talk About When I Talk About Running by Haruki Murakami.